Hello everyone, it's Miss Daly here with Biggie Bunny. She's come to say hello. So, we're going to read you a story today. We're going to read Matilda by Roald Dahl. I bet you can't wait to hear the story. Have you seen the movie of Matilda? Because I loved the book when I was small. And then when I grew up, well, when I was a bit older, not grown up, but when I was about probably 12, they brought out a movie of this book. So you can see, somebody's put a sticker on this one. You can see that Matilda has a book here. She loves books. And the back of the book, what's written on the back of the book? Description of all the things that happen. Will we read the description to see if we want to keep going?
Matilda is an extraordinary girl, sensitive and brilliant, but her gormless parents think she is just a nuisance and treat her as a scab to be endured until the time comes to flick her away. As if this isn't enough, Matilda has to cope with the odious head mistress, Miss Trunchbull, who terrorizes the whole school. But when Matilda is attacked by Miss Trunchbull one day, she suddenly discovers she has an extraordinary power and realizes she can make trouble for the monstrous grown-ups in her life.
Okay, well, the first thing on the back of the book is a picture of the author, the person who wrote the book. Does anybody know who the author of Matilda is? Who's that guy? I bet you know his name. Roald Dahl. And who's the person that does the drawings in the book? Because I think the person who does the drawings for Roald Dahl is quite famous. Does anybody know the name of the person who does the either? Oh, illustrated. So he's the illustrator, and his name is, what is it? Quentin Blake. Quentin Blake. And you'll always know Quentin Blake's illustrations because look at those characters. Isn't that cool? Kind of a picture. I love the way he uses shadows. So, can't wait to get to that part of the book, actually. It's very funny. Will we start? We'll have a look at page 1. Open up the book and let us have a look. Chapter 1, called The Reader of Books. So that's you right now. It's a funny thing about mothers and fathers. Even when their own child is the most disgusting little blister you could ever imagine, they still think that he or she is wonderful. Some parents go further. They become so blinded by adoration that they manage to convince themselves that their child has qualities of genius. Well, there's nothing wrong with all of this. It's the way of the world. It's only when parents begin telling us about the brilliance of their own revolting offspring that we start shouting, "Bring us a basin! We're going to be sick!" Oh my goodness. This book has very difficult to turn pages because it's so old. School teachers suffer a good deal from having to listen to this sort of twaddle from proud parents, but they usually get their own back when the time comes to write the end of year reports. If I was a teacher, I would cook up some real scorchers for the children of doting parents. Your son Maximilian, I would write, is a total washout. I hope you have a family business you can push him into when he leaves school, because he sure as heck won't get a job anywhere else. Or if I were feeling lyrical that day, I might write, "It is a curious truth that grasshoppers have their hearing organs in the sides of their abdomen. Your daughter Vanessa, judging by what she's learnt this term, has no hearing organs at all. I might even delve deeper into the natural history and say the periodical cicada spends 6 years as a grub underground and no more than 6 days as a free creature of sunlight and air. Your son Wilfred has spent 6 years as a grub in this school, and we are still waiting for him to emerge from the chrysalis. A particularly poisonous little girl might sting me into saying, Fiona has the same glacial beauty as an iceberg, but unlike the iceberg, she has absolutely nothing beneath the surface. I think I might enjoy writing end-of-term reports for the stickers in my class, but enough of that. We have to get on. Just a note there, that was not me reading my own thoughts. It was me reading Roald Dahl's thoughts. I don't think that should happen. Occasionally, one comes across parents who take the opposite line, who show no interest at all in their children, and of course these are far worse than the doting ones. Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood were two such parents. They had a son called Michael and a daughter called Matilda, and the parents looked on Matilda in particular as nothing more than a scab. A scab is something that you have to put up with until the time comes when you can pick it up and flick it away. Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood looked forward enormously to the time when they could pick their little daughter up and flick her away, preferably into the next county or even further than that. Now, I'm just going to show you the illustrations here, because Quentin Blake is famous for his illustrations, and I especially love his characters because I think he just presents them really nicely. So have a guess which one's Michael, and have a guess which one's Matilda. Thank you, Quentin Blake. Where were we? It is bad enough when parents treat ordinary children as though they were scabs and bunions, but it becomes somehow a lot worse when the child in question is extraordinary, and by that I mean sensitive and brilliant. Matilda was both of these things, but above all she was brilliant. Her mind was so nimble, and she was so quick to learn, that her ability should have been obvious, even to the most half-witted of parents. But Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood were both so gormless and so wrapped up in their own silly little lives that they failed to notice anything unusual about their daughter. To tell the truth, I doubt they would have noticed had she crawled into the house with a broken leg. Matilda's brother Michael was perfectly normal, but the sister, as I said, was something to make your eyes pop. By the age of 1.5, her speech was perfect, and she knew many words that most grown-ups did. The parents, instead of applauding her, called her a noisy chatterbox and told her sharply that small girls should be seen and not heard. By the time she was 3, Matilda had taught herself to read by studying newspapers and magazines that lay around the house. At the age of 4, she could read well and fast, and she naturally began hankering after books. The only book in the whole of the enlightened house was something called Easy Cooking, and this belonged to her mother. When she had read this from cover to cover and learned all the recipes by heart, she decided she wanted something more interesting. Now here's Matilda having a little read for her tiny self, just like we're doing now. Having a little read. Isn't that right, Biggi? By the way, Biggi loves books. She has shelves full of books, and she loves to sit down at the end of a long day and let her imagination run away with her. So, she's a very imaginative bun. And look, here she is now again, Matilda, having another look at a book. Daddy, said Matilda, do you think you could buy me a book? A book, he said. What do you want a flaming book for? To read, Daddy. What's wrong with the telly, for heaven's sake? You got a lovely telly with a 12-inch screen, and now you're come asking for a book. You're getting spoiled, my girl. Nearly every weekday afternoon, Matilda was left alone in her house. Her brother, 5 years older than her, went to school. Her father went to work, and her mother went out playing bingo in a town 8 miles away. Mrs. Wormwood was hooked on bingo and played it 5 afternoons a week. On the afternoon of the day when her father had refused to buy her a book, Matilda set out by herself to the public library in the village. When she arrived, she introduced herself to the librarian, Mrs. Phelps. She asked if she might sit a while and read a book. Mrs. Phelps, taken slightly aback by the arrival of such a tiny girl, unaccompanied by a parent, nevertheless told her that she was very welcome. "Where are the children's books, please?" Matilda asked. "They're over there on those lower shelves," Mrs. Phelps told her. "Would you like me to help you find a nice one with lots of pictures in it?" "No, thank you," said Matilda. "I'm sure I can manage." From then on, every afternoon, as soon as her mother left for bingo, Matilda would toddle down to the library. The walk took only 10 minutes, and this allowed her 2 glorious hours sitting quietly by herself in a cosy corner, devouring one book after another. When she had read every single children's book in the place, she started wandering around in search of something else. Mrs. Phelps, who had been watching her with fascination for the past few weeks, now got up from her desk and went over to her. "Can I help you, Matilda?" she asked. "I'm wondering what to read next," Matilda said. "I've finished all the children's books." "You mean you've looked at the pictures?" "Yes, but I've read the books as well." Mrs. Phelps looked down at Matilda from her great height, and Matilda looked right back up at her. "I thought some were very poor," Matilda said, "but others were lovely. I liked The Secret Garden best of all. It was full of mystery. The mystery of the room behind the closed door, and the mystery of the garden behind the big wall." Mrs. Phelps was stunned. "Exactly how old are you, Matilda?" she asked. 4 years and 3 months, said Matilda. Mrs. Phelps was more stunned than ever, but she had the sense not to show it. "What sort of a book would you like to read next?" she asked. Matilda said, "I would like a really good one that grown-ups read. A famous one. I don't know any names." Mrs. Phelps looked along the shelves, taking her time. She didn't know what to bring out. How, she asked herself, does one choose a famous grown-up book for a 4-year-old girl? Her first thought was to pick out a young teenager's romance of the kind that is written for a 15-year-old school child, but for some reason she found herself instinctively walking past that particular shelf. "Try this," she said at last. "It's very famous and very good. If it's too long for you, just let me know, and I'll find something shorter and a bit easier." Great Expectations, Matilda read, by Charles Dickens. "I'd love to try it." "I must be mad," Mrs. Phelps told herself. But to Matilda she said, "Of course you may try it." Over the next few afternoons, Mrs. Phelps could hardly take her eyes from the small girl sitting for hour after hour in the big armchair at the far end of the room with the book on her lap. It was necessary to rest it on the lap, because it was too heavy for her to hold up. So this meant that she had to sit leaning forward in order to read. And a strange sight it was, this tiny, dark-haired person sitting there with her feet nowhere near touching the floor, totally absorbed in the wonderful adventures of Pip and old Miss Havisham and her cobwebbed house, and by the spell of magic that Dickens, the great storyteller, had woven with his words. The only movement from the reader was the lifting of the hand every now and again to turn over the page. And Mrs. Phelps always felt sad when it came time for her to cross the floor and say, "10 to 5, Matilda." During the first week of Matilda's visits, Mrs. Phelps had said to her, "Does your mother walk home with you every afternoon?" "My mother goes to Aylesbury every afternoon to play bingo," said Matilda. "She doesn't know I come here." "But surely that's not right," said Mrs. Phelps. "I think you'd better ask her." "I'd rather not," said Matilda. "She doesn't encourage reading books. Nor does my father." "But what do they expect you to do every afternoon in an empty house?" "Just mooch around and watch the telly." "I see. She doesn't really care what I do, Matilda said, a little sadly. Mrs. Phelps was concerned about the child's safety on the walk through the fairly busy village high street and the crossing of the road. But she decided not to interfere. Within a week, Matilda had finished Great Expectations, which in that edition had contained 411 pages. I loved it, she said to Mrs. Phelps. Has Mr. Dickens written any others? A great number, said Mrs. Phelps astoundedly. Shall I choose you another? There she is having an old read for herself. Under Mrs. Phelps' compassionate and watchful eye over the next few weeks, Matilda read the following books. Get out a pen so that you can take these down. Nicholas Nickleby by Charles Dickens, Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, Tess of the Dubervilles by Thomas Hardy, Gone to Earth by Mary Webb, Kim by Rudyard Kipling, The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells, The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway, The Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner, The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck, The Good Companions by J.B. Priestley, Brighton Rock by Graham Greene, and Animal Farm by George Orwell. It was a formidable list, and by now Mrs. Phelps was filled with wonder and excitement, but it was probably a good thing that she did not allow herself to be completely carried away. Almost anyone else witnessing the achievements of this small child would have been tempted to make a great fuss and shout the news all over the village, but not Mrs. Phelps. She was someone who minded her own business, and had long since discovered it was seldom worthwhile to interfere with other people's children. Mr. Hemingway says a lot of things I don't understand, Matilda said to her, especially about men and women, but I loved it all the same. The way he tells it, I feel as if I'm right there on the spot, watching it all happen. A fine writer will always make you feel like that, Mrs. Phelps said. And don't worry about the bits you can't understand. Just sit back and allow the words to wash around you like music. I will, said Matilda. Did you know, said Mrs. Phelps, that public libraries like this allow you to borrow books and take them home? I didn't know that, said Matilda. Could I do that? Of course, Mrs. Phelps said. When you've chosen the book you want, bring it to me so I can make a note of it, and then it's yours for 2 weeks. You can take more than one if you wish. She seems nice. Doesn't she, Biggi? What do you think of Mrs. Phelps? Sound as a pound. From then on, Matilda would visit the library only once a week in order to take out some new books and return the old ones. Her own small bedroom now became her reading room, and there she would sit most afternoons, often with a mug of hot chocolate beside her. Good idea. She was not quite tall enough to reach things around the kitchen, but she kept a small box in the outhouse which she brought in and stood on in order to get whatever she wanted. Mostly it was hot chocolate she made, warming the milk in a saucepan on the stove before mixing it. Occasionally she made Bovril or Ovaltine. It was pleasant to take a hot drink up to her room and have it beside her as she sat in her silent room reading in the empty house in the afternoons. The books transported her into new worlds and introduced her to amazing people who lived exciting lives. She went on olden day sailing ships with Joseph Conrad. She went to Africa with Ernest Hemingway and to India with Rudyard Kipling. She travelled all over the world while sitting in her living room in a little English village. So that's the chapter that I'm going to read you for today. Biggi enjoyed it. She looks very happy. Yeah. She's a very sweet rabbit. She loves pets and she loves people and she loves just having a bit of crack. Anything she's involved in she loves. Oh, she loves toilet roll tubes. They're her favourite. Anyone who has ever had me as a teacher will know that I collect toilet roll tubes. It's mostly because this rabbit can't get enough of them. So I'll talk to you again soon. I might do a live video where I read to you live on the spot. So let me know what you think of it and any other books that you'd like to recommend for me to read. I can get a hold of lots of different types of books. So I'll talk to you soon and I'll see you another time for another chapter of Bye.